Belgorod, Bryansk, we saw several probably attempts of attack. There may be some reconnaissance action taking place because Russian monitoring channels reported that Ukrainian troops were spotted in that area, sometimes involving tanks, heavy armored vehicles. So it is possible that we will also see some scenario like it happened in Sudzha, for example, in the neighboring territories in Bryansk Oblast and possibly Belgorod Oblast as well.
I wanted to ask you about Russia's manpower problem, because it seems to me like Putin is in a really difficult situation whereby he's got a huge casualty rate on the front line in Ukraine. He's got conscripts now fighting on the front line in Kursk, and a lot of those are quite poorly trained. He's got an issue whereby he doesn't want to stage further mobilization because of the political problems that might cause him at home, and he doesn't want to divert troops to Kursk from the front line in Ukraine. So we're hearing about the Russian authorities now setting up new volunteer defense task forces. And having spent months, if not years, talking about the high Russian casualty rate, but basically Russia have been able to get away with it until now because Putin is happy to send people into the meat grinder. Are we now at the point where the Russian casualty rate is really starting to cause an issue for Vladimir Putin? Is this the point where he can't get away with it any longer?
I would say, unfortunately, it's not enough. Not only for Putin, but also for the civilians, for the people populating the terrorist federation. Unfortunately, it's not enough. And my personal prediction for after this incursion happened is that Putin will probably not use this big number of conscripts that he currently has in his possession across the Russian Federation. There's approximately 200,000 Russian conscripts that he can use at any time. A lot of predictions were made by different people, different opinion makers, that he will most probably use those conscripts in order to fight the Ukrainian armed forces in the area. But to me personally, it doesn't seem so, because using conscripts always results in Russian mothers protesting and things like that. That is something that he doesn't want to show to public. Something that he wants to keep secret from his general population. That's why I think that he may still sacrifice some territory in Kursk, maybe in Belgorod. But he will be using more and more mobilized people, his regular troops, in order to fight it, because Russians don't care about two things. It's human life and it's time. They don't really care about those things. It will, of course, slow down their offensive operations, for example, in Zaporizhia and Kharkiv, but they don't care much about time. They will keep pushing no matter the casualties, and no matter maybe 2 years, 3 years additionally that they will spend on this invasion of Ukraine. They don't care much about it.
It's obviously been a very encouraging few weeks for Ukraine since the incursion into Kursk, but it is worth noting Russia continues to make some incremental gains around Pokrovsk. How concerned are you about that?
We are pretty much concerned about it, but we saw the same situation in Pokrovsk last month. There's a lot of people criticizing the incursion of Kursk because they believe that it led to losing the territory in the Pokrovsk direction. But, for example, Ocherretino situation there was also hard even before the incursion of Kursk happened, and it didn't change much since that moment. A lot of military, even in that area, in the Pokrovsk direction that I talked with, they say that even despite the fact that they still have to slowly retreat back, inflicting casualties to the Russian personnel, but the operation in Kursk is still really, really important. and the route for those guys currently on the Russian territory, the Ukrainian soldiers.
It's really interesting when people debate what the primary objective of the Kursk incursion was. And, some people say it's about diverting Russian troops. Other people say it's about taking the war physically to Putin. I increasingly wonder whether it was also designed to send a message to Ukraine's Western allies of, look, we can physically cross a red line, we can physically invade Russia. And the worst case scenario that the West is worried about, of Putin, for example, using tactical nuclear weapons, will not come to pass. And we don't want to be complacent about that, but it certainly hasn't come to pass so far. Do you agree with that? Do you think in part it was designed to send that message to the West?
It was one of the goals. One of the goals was to show Western society that we are not afraid of Russian invaders, and we will be fighting them on their territory. Because in the end, Adolf Hitler, for example, was not captured like in Ukraine or in Russia. He was captured in Berlin, right? That's why we have to go there. But like, hypothetically. But another important goal of this incursion was that Russians are using their territory. Russians using their missile complexes, mobile and stationary missile complexes, in order to launch their missiles at Ukrainian cities. They launched their attack drones from Kursk Oblast, from Belgorod, and unfortunately, our allies protect, those agreements with other Western allies at times protect Ukrainian airplanes and Russian airplanes and Russian missiles more than they protect Ukrainian sky. Unfortunately, that's a fact. That's why it was an attempt to say that, okay, we cannot use long-range weapons to strike those targets. We will just go and make sure that they stop killing Ukrainian civilians, and that's what we're doing right now. Of course, from the Kursk territory, it's much easier to strike those targets located there, in just 70 kilometers away from our armed forces, and that's exactly what we can see. Even until today, Russians still keep launching their strike drones from Kursk Oblast, but we saw it happening like this week during those drone strikes on Ukraine. They were still launching them from Kursk. So if we are not allowed to use our weapons to strike them from Ukrainian territory, from safe distance, then we have no other choice but to go there ourselves.
I mean, we will see whether the US and other Western allies of Ukraine loosen some of those restrictions in the weeks and months to come. Certainly, President Zelensky and many Ukrainians will be hoping so. I just wonder whether Zelensky and General Siersky might be considering using some of those weapons anyway, even without their permission, in the same way that the Kursk incursion, as far as we know, did not have any prior approval by the White House, for instance, and it's better almost to seek forgiveness than ask permission. And I wonder whether Ukraine might now feel emboldened to use, for example, the Storm Shadow missiles or long-range ATACMS to hit some of those military targets inside Russia without the West's permission. And once that red line has been crossed, and you'd hope there isn't some massive escalation by Russia, well, maybe the West will just fundamentally change its position. Do you think that may happen?
Well, situation is not that critical yet, to use all we can without permission. But of course, Ukrainian president and Ukrainian general staff, they keep their word. Because unlike Russians, for example, we respect agreements. And there is another situation that not a lot of people talk about, is that situation with the military aid to Ukraine is critical at this point, because a lot of things that were promised to Ukraine in 2023 or 2022, they are not yet delivered. For example, the Patriot batteries, the Patriot systems that were promised by the United States like years ago, I believe, they were not delivered yet. It takes a lot of time for reasons nobody can explain to deliver that absolutely necessary military aid. Some of it is promised to be delivered to Ukraine in like 2027, even though we needed it yesterday, literally. And it's very easy to lose even that tiny support that we have. People that believe that Ukraine is like massively brought all kinds of weapons, American taxes parachuted over people and things like that, tanks, Abramses, hundreds of armored vehicles, they are deluded. They don't understand that Ukraine was only brought a fraction of the aid that was promised. And this is, again, something we should talk about, because Ukrainians need this aid yesterday. And we really hope that our allies will finally understand that if they don't help Ukraine right now with everything our army requires to protect our citizens, they will need to think about ways to somehow protect themselves against Russian aggressor in the future.
Thank you for watching this episode of Frontline for Times Radio. For more on the war in Ukraine, subscribe to the Times Radio YouTube channel. Listen to Times Radio on your digital radio, or you can read the Times online with your digital subscription or in print. Thank you and goodbye.